You know that friend who always cancels plans? The one who's suddenly tired again, busy again, or says, maybe next time. You might think they're avoiding you, but what if they're actually protecting something? Because for some people, a Friday night in pajamas feels better than a Friday night out. No crowded rooms, no forced conversations, no exhausting social energy, just their favorite food, their favorite show, and peace. And if that sounds like you, you're about to feel very understood. Today, we're exploring the psychology of people who genuinely love staying home. The people society sometimes calls boring, while psychology may see something much more interesting. They recharge differently. Here's the first thing to understand. Not everyone gets energy from the same environment. Extroverted people often enjoy stimulation, social interaction, movement, and being around others. But people who prefer solitude may recharge in a completely different way. For them, constant interaction can become mentally exhausting. Even when they're having fun, a party can be enjoyable and still leave them completely drained afterward. That's why home can feel like a charger. The outside world takes energy. Home gives it back. And this doesn't necessarily mean someone is antisocial. It may simply mean they have a lower preference for stimulation. Psychology has explored this through ideas like optimal arousal theory, the idea that people differ in the amount of stimulation they find comfortable and enjoyable. Some people want more. Others feel better with less. It's not automatically laziness, and it's not automatically fear. Sometimes, it's simply how they function best. They like being in control of their environment. But there's another reason some people prefer staying home. Control. Think about what happens when you're outside. Unexpected noise, crowded places, last-minute changes, strangers, small, talk, traffic, plans changing at the last second. You don't control much of it. But at home, you control almost everything. The lighting, the music, the temperature, the food, the noise, and most importantly, who gets access to your energy. For people who are highly sensitive to stimulation, having control over their environment can feel incredibly calming. Home becomes more than just a place to sleep. It becomes a place where their nervous system can finally relax. Solitude can create space for creativity. And here's something people often misunderstand. Being alone doesn't necessarily mean doing nothing. Some people do their best thinking when nobody is around. Without constant conversations, notifications, and distractions, the mind has more room to wander. That's when ideas can appear. A solution to a problem, a new business idea, a story, a creative project, or simply a thought you've never had time to explore. Sometimes the best ideas don't happen in a crowded room. They happen at midnight, with a book, a cup of coffee, or someone sitting quietly and thinking about life. For some people, solitude isn't empty. It's where their inner world becomes louder. They don't need constant entertainment. And let's be honest, modern culture constantly tells us that we're supposed to be out there. Go out, meet people, travel, party, make memories, live your best life. Social media can make it seem like everyone else is constantly having an incredible time. But what if your version of a good life looks completely different? What if your perfect Saturday is a comfortable couch, your favorite meal, a movie you've already watched 10 times, a quiet room, and absolutely zero obligations? Would that really be sad? Not necessarily. Sometimes knowing what genuinely makes you happy is a form of self-awareness. You don't always need a crowd to prove you're enjoying your life. But there's an important difference. However, there's something we shouldn't ignore. Not everyone who stays home is doing it because they love solitude. Sometimes staying home can be connected to social anxiety, depression, past experiences, or emotional exhaustion. And that's where the difference becomes important. Ask yourself, do I stay home because it gives me peace? Or do I stay home because leaving feels overwhelming? Those two things can look almost identical from the outside, but internally, they're completely different. One can be healthy solitude. The other can become isolation. Home can be a refuge. But if fear keeps you trapped there, it can also become a cage. Understanding the difference matters. They notice the small things. But for people who genuinely enjoy being at home, there's something beautiful about their lifestyle. They often find happiness in things other people overlook. The first coffee of the morning, their favorite chair, a familiar playlist, cooking something they love, reading quietly, watching the sunlight move across the room. That peaceful feeling when the entire house is quiet. These moments may seem small, but small doesn't mean meaningless. Sometimes happiness isn't about having more experiences. It's about actually noticing the experiences you already have. Their inner world can be rich. Psychology sometimes describes people who prefer lower levels of stimulation as having a low stimulation preference. They don't necessarily need the outside world to constantly entertain them. Their own thoughts can be enough. They can spend hours thinking, creating, reading, learning, imagining, or simply reflecting. And that's why someone who looks incredibly quiet from the outside may have an incredibly active world on the inside. They aren't necessarily bored. They're somewhere else entirely, in their own thoughts. So the next time someone cancels plans and chooses to stay home, don't automatically assume they're lonely. They might be, but they might also be completely happy. Because there's a huge difference between being alone and feeling alone. Some people don't need a crowded room to feel alive. They need a quiet space where they can finally hear themselves think. And maybe that's not boring at all. Maybe it's simply a different way of experiencing life. So tell me, do you genuinely love staying home? Or do you sometimes use it as an excuse to avoid the outside world? And if you want to understand the psychology behind the things people rarely talk about, watch the next video. It might make you understand yourself a little differently.